Now, the virus first appeared in Wuhan in December. The authorities say it passed to humans from animals at this food market in the city. But if it began in Wuhan, then there were cases recorded in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen.
The coronavirus is turning megacities into ghost towns and cruise ships into floating prisons.
Macau now has 7 confirmed cases of the coronavirus. The city is now looking like a ghost town during what is normally one of the busiest times of the year for the casino hub.
Passengers on the Diamond Princess cruise ship are now in a 14-day quarantine after 20 passengers tested positive for coronavirus. And we are
24/7. We are not allowed to open the door until there is a knock on the door and they bring the food to us. Other than that, we are like prisoners.
And while we don't know how to treat it, we do know its symptoms and how it spread.
The main symptoms of the virus include breathing difficulties, fever, and coughing. But in vulnerable people, especially among the elderly, it can lead to organ failure, pneumonia, and death. There's no treatment, so prevention is a top priority.
Currently, the virus is transmitted through droplets, and you need a close contact to be infected.
But despite travel bans and the World Health Organization declaring it a public health emergency, the death toll continues to rise.
The number of confirmed cases now approaching 24,000, nearly 500 fatalities.
Now, it's not only affecting people's health, but every aspect of society.
Growing concern about the global impact. Major U.S. retailers closing thousands of stores across China. Airline service suspended. Car companies and manufacturers shutting down factories or losing critical Chinese suppliers.
Coming up on Football Today, how is the coronavirus affecting football?
The first thing that was speculated would be affected was the Tokyo 2020 women's football qualifiers.
Jonathan White is a senior production editor at the South China Morning Post and is based in Hong Kong.
They were scheduled to take place in Wuhan, which is where the women's team are ordinarily based. First of all, the CFA said in the lead up to what was going to be the Lunar New Year week, and that's a time where everyone's off in China. It's the most important holiday. In the lead up to that, they initially said, we have no plans to move it. Then a couple of days later, they moved it to Nanjing, which is several hundred kilometres away. And then, since then, with the AFC getting involved because of concerns from other countries, it's been moved to Australia. Aside from that, the CFA, in accordance with what the General Administration for Sport was saying to every sport, such as the Chinese Basketball Association, they've suspended action. So the CFA suspended action at all levels. There's no football, there's no trade. So football essentially is on hiatus. What then happened was, because there were 4 Chinese teams going into the AFC Champions League, the AFC first looked at changing the match day schedule. So initially, it was the first 3 match days involving Chinese clubs were moved outside of China. So they would play the 3 away games first instead of home away in the the normal way. That was the first major impact on the AFC Champions League. What they've since done, because of travel measures being introduced in various countries, is the AFC have decided to postpone Chinese teams' first match days. So the first 3 games, which were set for away, should have started on February the 11th and 12th. They've been moved to later into March and then into April for the other ones. With the one exception right now that Beijing Guoan will still play Chiang Rai United in Thailand, because they've been in South Korea and they are still eligible to travel to Thailand. So it's certainly had an effect. It's keeping the AFC busy. It's keeping the CFA busy.
The experience of the Chinese women's team is particularly interesting. What's gone on with them in the last couple weeks?
So the Chinese women's team, they had been to Wuhan, but then they moved to Suzhou to do their training. When they left for Australia, they left via Shanghai, because they'd been to Wuhan in the previous month. When they arrived in Australia, they were tested and taken directly to the hotel for quarantine. That meant that these already postponed Tokyo 2020 qualifiers had to be moved again, because they were going to be in quarantine until 2 matches into the tournament. So they've had to move them again. The tournament is currently ongoing in Sydney. Today, they have finished their quarantine and they will be travelling for their first game, which will be delayed against Thailand. So they've not been training. So it's been a bit of a difficult situation for them to combat because they've had to, stretch in hotel corridors rather than, getting out on the training pitch and planning as they would for what are 3 big games. They need to finish in the top 2 to go through to the next round, which is the last round of Asia qualifying. On top of that, they've also left all of their Wuhan-based and Wuhan-born players back in China. So their best player, Wang Shuang, hasn't travelled, which is another difficult thing for the Chinese women's team to overcome.
Yeah, I think I saw a video of her on TikTok practicing on the roof of her apartment building with her brother.
It's certainly been difficult. Obviously, there's more important things than sport, but with the Olympics coming up and China being one of the better teams in Asia, they would be expected to go and give it a go. And this has certainly given them pause for thought in their plans.
You said that there are doubts about what will happen with the Chinese Super League season. It's been postponed till April, as you said. What type of effect will that have on the league if it's moved back and then moved back again?
Well, this is going to be interesting to see because what happens normally, and to use normal in terms of Chinese football is a bit of a stretch, but what happens normally is the season is in 2 halves and there's a big break in the middle of it, largely because a lot of places in China are too hot to play football at this point. What happened last season was there were 3 separate breaks, which were all about a month long for national team training camps ahead of their World Cup qualifier. So each World Cup qualifier, the national team met and the league broke up for a month. There's no way if they're going to play April to December or later than that to December, and it'll be the first week of December because playing after that is too cold in China. There's no way they're going to be able to fit a season and several breaks in. So they would have to probably play games around the national team, have a 2-week break rather than a month long. That would be the first thing that would have to happen. They also probably have to change the summer break from being a month or 6 weeks, which it has been in previous years. Occasionally 2 months around the World Cup. So that'll have an effect. The other thing is they'll probably have to play 2 or 3 games a week, which is, not a big deal in some countries like England. But in China, more often than not, games are a week apart. So that'd be a massive workload for the players. So there might be some backlash against that. But it remains to be seen what the schedule will be because it remains to be seen when it will start.
Now, interestingly, Wuhan Zal, the Chinese Super League team from Wuhan that are in Spain right now, have struggled to play their preseason friendlies. Can you describe why they haven't been able to do so?
Yeah, it's been interesting, the Wuhan case, because the team left for Guangzhou, which is 1,000 kilometres away. They left at the start of January, January the 2nd, and then they arrived in Spain from Guangzhou at the end of January. They were tested by the Spanish authorities on arrival. As their coach pointed out, they've got a doctor with the team. It's a football team. Of course, they've got a doctor travelling with them. They've had it in the training camp. None of the players have shown any signs of, having the coronavirus, none of the symptoms. But still, before they arrived, I believe, Krasnodar, the Russian team, pulled out of a friendly. And then the last one was Europa Point, which were a team from Gibraltar. They also just pulled out. It's unclear whether Wuhan will be able to get a game while they're there, which isn't a great pre-season. The players, a lot of them have family in the city, so they've got that to worry about as well. And then finally, they're not allowed back into Wuhan. So they're going to be in Spain till at least the middle of February, which was longer than they'd originally planned. It was interesting that the coach said he was hoping that the team would find some empathy while they're in Spain, but it appears that, they haven't done that. It's a very unfortunate circumstance, and there's no real reason why, you can't play a team that have been cleared by a Spanish government for not being sick. So that's not been a great look for anyone involved. On top of that, there's been widespread reports of xenophobia around the world based on this virus, and football has been no exception. Some people made some coronavirus-related jokes on the arrival of Odion Ighalo at Manchester United. Some people made some jokes similar, but a lot fewer, from the Dutch lad who has just signed from Ighalo's former club, Changchun Yatai, to Sheffield United. Son Heung-min of Spurs was the subject of a few off-colour comments that were virus-related during the game against Manchester City on social media. Interestingly, there have been positives, like Gio Moreno, Espanyol, who have got a Chinese player in Wulei. They posted on their Chinese social media that they've sent over 450,000 face masks to Wuhan. So the football world has shown some of its positive side as well as the negative during it, but we will wait and see.
Kind of going forward in the coming days, weeks, and months, what can we expect in terms of the coronavirus and its impact on football and just kind of the greater sports landscape in China?
So right now, everything until April has been either called off or moved or postponed. The AFC futsal tournament, which wasn't scheduled to take place in China, I think it's in Turkmenistan, that has been postponed. So it's having a wider effect on the region. The AFC Champions League, they've postponed the games for now, and what they've said they will do is 3 weeks before every game, they will assess whether it's possible for it to go ahead, and 2 weeks before the game, they will suggest a neutral venue if that's needed. So there's going to be a wider effect on the region-wide competitions, those continental competitions, the AFC Champions League, the AFC Cup. It's an Olympics year, so there's a lot of regional qualifiers. Other events were moved from Wuhan. Before the end of April, early May, there are a lot of events. The biggest one of them is probably the Shanghai Grand Prix. And the word from them is that they're also monitoring the situation. Right now, it's unclear what will go ahead and what will not. But everyone is sensibly erring on the side of caution. So if there's any risk at all, then things will be either postponed or cancelled.
Cameron Wilson is the editor of Wild East Football and lives in Shanghai, which is about 800 kilometers or 500 miles east of Wuhan. Cameron, what is it like to be in Shanghai right now?
It's pretty difficult to put into words because I've personally, although I've been in China for 15 years, I've not experienced this kind of situation before here or anywhere else. I mean, I would say my personal feeling is it's probably bemusement more than anything else. I mean, it's not right now. I'm looking out the window of my apartment. There's not really a lot of people on the streets. They've closed. For example, my compound is a housing complex with 6 or 7 big kind of blocks of residential apartments, which are surrounded by it's like a gated kind of community. So there's 2 gates in and out, and one of them's been locked because they want everyone to go out the same gate so the guards can check on people. The local supermarket is still open, but they're struggling to keep the shelves full. You have to wash your hands at the entrance when you go in. You have to get your temperature taken. It's all kind of really bizarre, to be honest, and I just really struggle to put it into words. I've been talking to a lot of people about this, obviously, since this started, and it's just kind of surreal. But the one thing I would say is that in Shanghai, at least, there's no real feeling of imminent danger or anything like that. People are just bored of having to stay at home. That's how things stand right now, and it's just bizarre.
It sounds a little bit almost like straight out of a movie in that, you're in a city full of 15, 20 million people, and yet it's kind of, a ghost town, as we were discussing before we got on air a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good way to explain it. It does feel a little bit post-apocalyptic.
You said that you were speaking with lots of friends and people around you. What have those conversations been like?
Yeah, the conversations I've been having with friends it's a pretty similar mood. No one's really that afraid for their health. I would say it's just unsettling. There's not this feeling of fear. It's more, people are just more worried about what the consequences of the virus is going to be. For example, once it passes, how is it going to affect our jobs or everyday life? Are some people even going to still have a job? Is it going to be inconvenient to get to work? Are there going to be checks on public transport and so on and so forth? Is everyone going to have to wear a mask in the office for a couple of months or whatever? People just don't know. And it's just, I'd say the word is really unsettling.
Have you spoken with people about sports at all since this happened, in the last couple of weeks?
Not really. I think the feeling is that sport is fairly not a priority at the moment. There's some, I'm fairly active on, they've got like a WeChat group which discusses Chinese football. There's still plenty of discussion in there. It's going on all the time. Same on Twitter. In the Chinese media, there's still transfer news coming in. The wheels are still turning, but everyone's just resigned to the fact that the season is not going to start at the end of February as planned, and nobody's sure when it will start.
According to a tweet I read of yours, you were scheduled to go to a Shanghai Shenhua game in Perth in Australia, but that game was eventually postponed. How did it feel to miss out on that trip?
I'm bitterly disappointed. I was planning to go there. I'd very cunningly sold it to my wife as like a mixed family stroke football tour. So I kind of feel like I used up some brownie points for a trip which has never actually happened, because we were thinking about not going as soon as this stuff started kicking off. And I held out. I said, well, look, as long as we can get on a flight and as long as we'll get into Australia, I really want to just go, because we're literally safer in Australia than China, of course, as regards the virus. And as I explained, there's no one really in Shanghai feels there's some kind of imminent risk anyway. So, I was all up for going, but then, of course, the Australian government decided to block people coming from China. So, that's their prerogative. But for me personally, it was very disappointing. And of course, I've actually never seen Shenhua play in the Asian Champions League overseas before, and I'd never actually been to Australia before. So I was really looking forward to it. So that was really disappointing. I also had planned to visit to Melbourne to see an old friend who I hadn't seen for 15 years. So it's really disappointing, and I know that a lot of other Shenhua fans were planning the same. Shenhua take a fairly impressive away showing to Asian Champions League games, which is impressive because of the distances involved. And of course, there's a lot of ethnically Chinese people in Australia, and quite a large number of them are actually from Shanghai originally, so they always get a good following there. So it's just disappointing for everyone.
I know you followed Shanghai Shenhua for more than a decade with the team and going on away trips, and we mentioned that you were going to go to Perth. Have Chinese supporter groups met since this outbreak to either comfort each other or to, get in touch, or have there been communication through these supporter groups?
Yeah, there's communication and activity, but only online. Actually, I was due to go to one of the Shanghai Shenhua fans groups is Lanmo, is the Blue Devils fan group. It's one of the most established and oldest fan groups in China. Actually, one of the first indications that things were starting to become abnormal was when they actually announced that their annual dinner, which usually happens on or around Chinese New Year, was suspended. But they announced that it was being cancelled, I think, over 2 weeks ago. But the other interesting thing which has been happening is a lot of fans are actually been getting together online and doing like video calls, like video conferences, and just sitting drinking beers and chatting online.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's been quite funny actually. And quite a bizarre experience doing this online, when usually if you would socialise online, it's usually with people who are in a different city or even different country. So that's been quite funny.
Usually sports is a way of bringing people together through a tragedy or following one. We just saw this with the death of Kobe Bryant in the NBA.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's possible in China? Could we see football bringing people together following this crisis?
That question strikes at the crux of the issue in China, which is getting people together. Yes, football is extremely powerful for bringing people together, people from all kinds of backgrounds and creeds. And that's a big part of my motivation for my involvement in Chinese football and the things I've done, like the website and supporters group activity and so on and so forth. But the sad thing is that China is a kind of place where it's difficult to talk about. I think that The authorities have historically been very afraid of people getting together. For example, there's apparently, I'm not sure where it's written down, and I'm not sure even if it is written down. In China is a kind of place where things are just so opaque. You never know if a rule is what it is said to be, if it really exists or if it's enforced that way. But I remember back in the day hearing stories from some of the supporters group guys saying that, they had to get special permission to get a group of people together who were more than 100 people. Or I don't know the exact figure, but it is something which needed express permission from local authorities. So there's this kind of political fear in China about people getting together in general, not for health reasons, but just political reasons. And that has dulled the power of football to really motivate people to feel free to express themselves, and that kind of self-expression of their fandom or their city that is part of the glue which really gets people excited and inspires passionate feelings about the game. It just taps into the idea, can football bring people together? Yes, it can, but in China there's already all these things which actually make it very difficult for football to prosper, certainly from a fan culture point of view. And I really fear that the situation with the virus, although I totally understand why the season's being postponed, I'm not saying that's the wrong decision, not at all, but I'm just saying that it kind of unfortunately is exacerbating a situation which is already not that great. So
are you kind of trying to say that you expect when the season gets back underway that the police or the state might, have an extra eye on those football stadiums because this is one of the few places where large amounts of people come together, and they might be concerned just kind of on the back of this crisis that there might be some sort of dissent?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. It makes the authorities are always nervous about this already. And I'm a little bit fearful that might make this usual state of unease they have towards crowds get worse.
So how do you think fans will react to not having domestic football or Asian football around them for the next 2 months? I mean, that's a long time.
I think the same way as anyone else would. I mean, I think everybody listening to your pod is probably a football fan or at least a sports fan. And just I'd ask everybody, imagine how you would feel if you were looking forward to the start of your season after a long, boring midwinter, which it always feels like in China when there's no football. It's the kind of darkest and most kind of depressing time of the year. So you always look to the football season as the start of the change in the season and better times lying ahead. But suddenly we don't have this to look forward to, so people are kind of pretty bummed about that.
So what can we expect sports' role to play in this crisis kind of going forward?
I think sports and football will probably be amongst the last things to come back online once all this has passed. So in that regard, it'll probably be a sign that normality is back. The reason I think football will not be played again for anytime soon is because simply that it's really quite non-essential, really, when put in the context of disease prevention and things like that. And also, as we talked about earlier, having masses of people in a small space is exactly what China's trying to prevent right now. So, in fact, it wouldn't even surprise me if they had some kind of restrictions on how many people can be in the stadium or stuff like that. It sounds a little bit silly to say that because you think, well, either people are going to be in the stadium or not, but that's the kind of thing they do in China. They do place limits on things, which seem to be, there's often an element of being seen to do things and putting regulations in place just for the sake of it. So once the CSL starts up again, I think that will be a sign that things are either back to normal or well on the way to being back to normal.
You can read more of Jonathan White's coverage of the coronavirus and its impact on football in the South China Morning Post. Cameron Wilson is the founder of Wildies Football and writes about the Chinese Super League. The show is produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and this was Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.